All right, guys, welcome back to the SLC Dunk Facebook Live. I wanted to talk about some things this week that I've been thinking about with the Jazz kind of in full swing with the offseason. We've got Summer League coming soon, but before that, we're going to have the NBA draft, and we're really excited about it. If you haven't seen it, go watch the last live video we did where we talked about some players that the Jazz might be drafting in their position. I'm thinking that we might do another video about players the Jazz might trade up for. That'll be the next time. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about the Jazz offseason plans, and there's really kind of 2.5 scenarios that the Jazz really have. There's like two likely scenarios and one very unlikely scenario that's kind of like the unicorn of scenarios for the Jazz. So let's talk about the crazy scenario for the Utah Jazz. That's a very big, like if this happened, it changes the Jazz franchise obviously next season, but maybe forever. And that's free agency. So there's three ways that teams require players. It's just free agency, draft, and trade. And one of the avenues that has, in general, been pretty difficult for the Jazz, but not as difficult as some people make out, is free agency. For example, the Jazz were able to get Carlos Boozer through free agency by giving him a big offer. The Jazz were able to get Joe Johnson, who chose to leave Miami to go to Utah. It wasn't a trade, it was free agency. Joe Johnson was interested in coming to Salt Lake City, something Jazz fans aren't particularly, surprised, like not used to in general. Jazz fans are used to getting kind of middle tier and lesser players in free agency, bottom of the barrel type players, outbidding for those players, and then that's how typically what the Jazz get in free agency. The other ways is through free agency and is through draft and trade that the Jazz have been able to do it. The way the Jazz have the unicorn scenario for the Jazz is obviously Paul George or LeBron James. And if the Jazz were able to get either of those two players, it takes the team to the next level immediately. Free agency is the thing that changes teams like that. James McGilvery. I always say it wrong. Am I saying it right? McGilvery? Hello. If you're able to get a player in free agency, it means you don't have to give up assets. And if it's a great player, it means you upgraded a position without any sort of sacrifice to your roster. It's the quickest way to upgrade your team immediately. Like when the Boston Celtics got Al Horford and he who shall not be named. Well, if we do name him, it's Gordon Blablard, who went to the Boston Celtics. Immediate upgrade for that team, and LeBron James going to Miami. Now, if LeBron James came to Utah, it would be absolutely the perfect scenario both for the Jazz and for LeBron. Why? Because the Jazz currently have Derek Favors in a free agency situation, and if LeBron James, he would immediately just come in and play the power forward for the Utah Jazz. And it would be an unbelievable fit because he would be able to play off Rudy Gobert at the power forward spot. It would stretch the floor. You would have Donovan Mitchell, Joe Ingles, and whatever other shooters the Jazz need to put around LeBron. It would be an incredible fit because he'd have that secondary superstar in Donovan Mitchell, who is himself a number one option now. And LeBron would have that. He would have a top 5 defense in the league, and by joining the Jazz, it would turn into a top 5 offense in the league. The Jazz would be finals contenders, if not just win the finals rather easily. That's the dream scenario. Is it going to happen? No, it's not going to happen. The second unicorn scenario for the Jazz is if Paul George comes to the Utah Jazz. If Paul George comes to the Jazz, you can immediately start playing with some crazy lineups. You have a 40% three-point shooter both on spot-ups and pull-ups. And you have that opposite Donovan Mitchell, Ricky Rubio, Joe Ingles, and you just figure it out position-wise, but you have Rudy Gobert at the 5, you have a top 5 defense, and you have a top 5 offense in the league also. So those are two scenarios where if that happened, it would be incredible. Is it going to happen? Probably not. The one that I think he'll at least think about it, and maybe it's because Donovan Mitchell tweeted about it, is Paul George. They're close friends, and we all know the story that Donovan Mitchell came into the draft because of what Paul George said. Paul George will think about it. Will he do it? No. Right now he's in LA at some sort of Fortnite event, doing things in LA that will make him probably choose to just go to LA. I think Paul George just wants to live in LA. That's where he's from. That's where he has homes. I think he's literally just told people that's where he wants to go. I did see a rumor online that, there's people around the league that think he might re-sign with OKC. Do I think? I don't know. We'll see. That is one of those things where LeBron James coming to Utah is not happening. But Paul George, maybe 2% chance? 3% chance? Maybe. It could happen. That's the unicorn scenario that might happen. All right. Now, let's talk about the two things that will happen for the Utah Jazz. So we have the draft coming up, and it's frustrating that free agency is post-draft because it would be nice to know what's going on with your team before you go into the draft. Last year was a good example. Gordon Hayward left the Utah Jazz and goes to Boston post-draft. So, if you're a team like the Cleveland Cavaliers and you don't know if LeBron James is going to stay or not, it would be nice to know before you go into the draft. If you know LeBron is leaving, then you can draft based off of that. But if you don't know if LeBron James is leaving, you have to draft waiting for that. And so it's just frustrating. I wish the league would make free agency before the draft. Because let's say the Jazz go out and get some player that they didn't, think they would get. Like, let's say Aaron Gordon, who is possibly one of the more likely candidates they could get in free agency. Let's say the Jazz are able to get him. He's the power forward of the future. The Jazz could draft based off of that. Or maybe they use their draft pick to get Aaron Gordon, some sort of sign and trade or something like that. It makes no sense. But anyways, so the scenarios for the Jazz, because free agency is post-draft, you have to think in terms of the draft. They are going to either move up in the draft or they are going to draft at their position. I think the more likely thing for the Utah Jazz is they just draft where they are because it takes two teams to trade. Trading up in the draft, even though the Jazz have proven they've been able to do it, but with Denver, and with Minnesota to get Trey Burke, it's not very likely. The Jazz have tried to trade up in the past and have not been able to do it. But when they have been able to, two out of the last three times, it's turned out to be really good. They were able to get, obviously, they were able to trade up for Rudy Gobert with cash, and that was possibly one of the greatest trade-ups ever because it cost them nothing. And then Donovan Mitchell, they were able to trade up to get him for Trey Lyles, who did not pan out for Utah and may pan out for Denver. But right now, it's not looking like an even trade. The Jazz traded up. It was incredible. I think the Jazz might actually have a possibility to move up to 13 and 14. 14 is Denver, and we all know how that works out for the Jazz. If you can trade up with Denver and you're Utah, you do it because it means you're going to get a great player. Personally, I love Miles Bridges. If Miles Bridges falls to 13 or 14, watch for the Jazz to trade up big time. I saw that Sports Illustrated released their latest mock draft, and they had Miles Bridges falling to 15. That's a likely scenario for the Jazz to be able to trade up because that's with Washington, who has serious salary cap issues. Like, if the Jazz are going to trade up, which is very, it's the least likely scenario of the two, where the Jazz just either trade up or just draft where they are. Watch for it to be a team like Denver or the Wizards, who have cap problems and need cap relief. The Jazz could take on a player, give them the relief they need, and trade up. If you have a player like Miles Bridges jumping to 15, man, watch the Jazz trade up. That's going to happen. They're going to make that happen. If the Jazz have a player they like. I don't know who the Jazz really like. I know who I like. I think Miles Bridges is the future of the Jazz at the power forward, maybe. But you never know. But the Jazz, if there's a player they really like that drops, watch them trade up. Because the Jazz need to find another player that fits kind of along that Donovan Mitchell timeline. And if you can find a star player that fits that timeline, that'd be fantastic. Is it likely that a player is in the 12 to 20 range that's on Donovan Mitchell's level of stardom? No, it's very, very unlikely. But if there's a player that's a really high-level role player that you can get for relatively low sacrifice, that's great. And then he fits along Donovan Mitchell for a long time. And the Jazz have options at power forward too. If Derek Favors leaves and the Jazz don't re-sign Derek Favors, we have Jay Crowder, Thabo Sefolosha, and maybe someone in this draft like a Keita Bates-Diop or Miles Bridges. Most likely scenario for the Jazz is they stay put. The two things the Jazz really need to do is find another player in this draft, which is a very deep draft, and re-sign Dante Exum. I don't know if Derek Favors is very high on the priority list. If the free agency market dries up and there's not a lot of people looking for a center for Derek Favors who will play center for another team, he may be very gettable. And that benefits the Utah Jazz. He's able to be on the Jazz, play that power forward role or backup center or whatever you want, hopefully at a reasonable cost. But if Derek Favors gets a huge offer from someone, don't expect the Jazz to match it, because the Jazz have a lot of players falling off the next year in 2019. They'll have an opportunity to go after a big player and throw big money at someone and maybe upgrade that team around Donovan Mitchell when they can. But I personally would love to see the Jazz trade up in this draft if they can and get a player that they think can be a great fit. This is a really loaded draft, guys. The Jazz are going to be able to get someone like Kevin Huerter, like we talked about. If Eli Okobo is there at 21, that's a home run because he has a chance to be really good. If those players aren't available, you've still got players like Dante DiVincenzo. You've got Keita Bates-Diop, who could be a nice fit at the power forward for the Jazz if they like him. I think Andy Larson mentioned that there were a lot of positive things that came out of the Keita Bates-Diop workout, but he also passed out during the interview after because of back spasms. So that's, I don't know. Take that for what you will. But it's looking pretty good for the Utah Jazz. The offseason is going to be really interesting. I'm really interested to see when Dante Exum signs, but we have to wait till free agency, I believe. Unless I'm wrong. Tell me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I believe the Jazz have to wait till free agency to make that offer. But I can promise you that Dante Exum is going to be a big part of the Jazz future. He should be relatively cheap, not cheap, but like reasonable contract the Jazz can get and have him develop. And we just have not been able to tap into Dante Exum's potential. We saw it in the playoffs. 2 years in a row, his playoffs have been he's shown tons of flashes. Against Golden State, he had the offensive flashes. Against the Houston Rockets, he was a major part of our keeping that series close. He was the best at guarding Harden of anyone in the entire playoffs. So he just showed his potential, and if the Jazz can just re-sign him, I feel like he should be 10 to 14 million a year for 4 years and just let him be a big part of this team, because he might be that option we are just hoping to get. If he can put all the pieces together and become that X factor for the Jazz, pun intended, then things get really exciting. Let's see. I'm glad McGilvery. Let's see. Sorry, hopefully I got that right. Should the Jazz look to move Ingles? No, his contract's too good. I mean, unless it gets you a superstar, But otherwise, Joe Ingles is a big part of this team, and I just really don't feel like he's too valuable. He really is. Like, if you're trading Joe Ingles, you better get someone that's better. And there's not a lot of better players out there. I mean, I guess if you can trade for Paul George, but I think the difference is negligible, and he's inexpensive, and he's proven to be a top 10 wing in the league. So, Brandon Whiteside, we need someone to start in front of Ingles. George Ingles would be great off the bench. Ingles would be great off the bench. I mean, if you can get a player in free agency and Ingles can come off the bench, fantastic. But right now, Ingles plays great as a starter, guys. He's really good. Brandon Whiteside, no PGs. Brandon Whiteside, Exum is good. Exum really is good. And it's perfect situation for him to develop alongside Donovan Mitchell and also Royce O'Neal. And you have a player in Ricky Rubio who's going to be a perfect guard to play with these players. And you never know. Ricky Rubio really turned it on last year. And if he can play that high-level play for the whole season, the Jazz are excellent. All right, guys, that's all I got tonight. Make sure that you like and share this video with your buddies. We're going to be talking about more and more things. Like and subscribe. Go to SLC Dunk. Read all our draft profiles out there. We're putting out great content on slcdunk.com, and I hope you guys are reading it. We got draft profiles for everyone the Jazz might possibly get, unless they trade into like the top 10 or top 15, or if Miles Bridges, my man crush, falls to 15 for the Utah Jazz. You've got great stuff out there. And the downbeat will be dropping also tomorrow. So make sure you go and do all these things. Like and subscribe. My Twitter handle, @HansonJames. Follow me if you want. I might follow you back, but probably not because I just can't keep up with all the tweets. All right, talk to you later.